Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mics, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory prices and delivery of cards for Magic Online. I'm Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
Hi, everybody.
Ruben Bressler.
The horror! The horror!
We are going to open the best little horror house in Texas.
I love it.
Wow, that was a good one. Very nice. Well, we also begin with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who is the most eloquent, letting us know what card we did not choose to one of our top 10 Zendikar Rising cards. Ruben?
Well, there are a lot of exciting Zendikar Rising cards that we could have chosen from, but Austin Tanner, I felt like, had a compelling argument. He writes, or she, Zareth San, the trickster, is the real deal. It was pseudo-ninjutsu, which we all know is one of Evan's favorite mechanics, and considering most of the rogues on Zendikar mill, the second ability is just whoop, grab something from an opponent's graveyard. It is disgusting. Watching your opponent benefit from your Winota because Zareth is a merfolk and most rogues are humans is quite vomit-inducing. Bleh.
Very nice. Zareth San, the Trickster, is a terrific Magic card. This was a card that,
oh my God,
like, I didn't really think it was going to get there, and then you have it played against you for the first time, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. The rogues are just, it's interesting because the rogues are so pushed, but they're also the worst thing you want to be doing right now because of Uro. Like, when you look at the rogues, like, I was really blown away by them during the early access event because rogues fly, like, okay, and then, like, rogues mill, like, I didn't really get the flavor of it, where I was like, okay, Flash makes sense because you got to be, like, sneaky, like, that's cool, but then it's like, and then you have, like, the lead one, which can, like, reanimate something, like, it just...
steal stuff from your opponent's graveyard,
I guess, it just felt like there was no subtlety there, ironically enough, with rogues. It was just very, like, you're going to play this archetype.
You know kind of how they function, but you don't know kind of what they got. And I did have someone concede when I used Zareth San to get their Uro.
I had someone steal my things too. Because it was just like, okay, this has been fun, you know.
It was value. So for those who don't know, Zareth San the Trickster is a black, blue, and 3 generic mana for a 4/4 rare legendary merfolk rogue with flash. It has a black, blue, and 2 generic mana, return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand, put Zareth San the Trickster from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control.
Jeepers.
I've gotten Elspeth Conquers Death. I've gotten a Planeswalker. I have gotten all sorts of fatties of whatever variety, including Uro, which was just fun.
And then in Limited, it doesn't matter what you get.
Oh, Lord.
Just take your 3/3, just take your Hill Giant, and the game's over. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, this card is super cool and neat. And this was the card where I was like, okay, all right, rogues can be a deck because of this power. It's not just because they have like a bunch of like dorky little 1/1s and 1/3s or whatever. But no. When they can take your stuff, where you're playing the powered up stuff, that's the scary part.
And all the other rogues are milling them anyway.
Exactly.
So they always have something to take.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, we appreciate Austin being a part of the show. Please contact Erin on social media before she blocks you on all of them. 32,000 and counting.
We didn't check this week to see if Austin was already on the list. So
we try
fingers crossed, Austin. That
the last winner actually sent me a message the other day, and he's like, I gotta ask. I'm kind of new to the show, but like, that's not real, is it? And I'm like, yeah.
Oh, it's so
and you're
real.
like, try me, blocked.
Like, that's not real. And like,
are you calling me a liar?
Like,
never talking to you again.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thanks again to CoolStuffInc.com for sponsoring this giveaway. And stay tuned for our top 10 list this week. And maybe you can win next week's free gift certificate because we got some horrors in this house.
You said you were going to do that.
We did have to do it.
I can't not do it.
We have to do it once. One time.
That was my one time.
At this point, we can only apologize.
Everybody gets one. Well, that means we move on here to our top 10. One that was a little bit, we kind of were all over each other a little bit. We kind of went back and adjusted some stuff. So we got 3 hires each, I believe it is. Which is fine.
We have 3 hires each now. Yeah. Previously, I had 6 hires on my list because there was too much overlap. So I had to get a couple of my cards that I wanted to talk about that didn't originally make my top 10, but are worth a mention anyway.
Very nice. Yeah. So why don't you kick us off, Ruben, with number 10?
My number 10 was a card that was at number 10 the whole time because I feel like it was worth mentioning, and it was in a Pro Tour winning deck. Machine Head, one of the most random, weird decks. It was like a red-black, mid-range aggro deck, and I've talked about a bunch of these cards on the show before. You know, Ferexian Skuta being among them, but you also had hits like Skizik and Blazing Spectre, and of course, 4 copies of Plague Spitter. Plague Spitter is 2 colorless and a black for a 2/2 horror from Invasion. At the beginning of your upkeep, it deals 1 damage to each creature and each player, including itself, and when it dies, it deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. So this card in particular in this deck, because you had 4 Dark Ritual, you could power this out on turn 1 to be able to fight against your opponent's turn 1 plays, like, I don't know, or turn 2 plays also, things like Waterfront Bouncer, any sort of mana dork that they happen to have. And it was also just like a solid clock, because if you were playing against a control deck, it dealt them a damage, then it attacked for 2, then it dealt them a damage, then it attacked for 2, and even when they killed it, it got in 1 little bit of extra damage. So it was always this was a solid role player and the early game in that Machine Head deck.
This was something I had in my Rakdos Lord of Riots deck, because you can't cast Rakdos Lord of Riots unless an opponent has lost life or been dealt damage this turn. And so you would start off the upkeep and do 1 damage to each creature and each player, and so each player would take a damage, and then that would allow you to cast Rakdos. And then once Rakdos is out, that essentially makes your next creature at least 3 colorless cheaper. And
right.
So, yeah, this is definitely something you wanted to be doing in that deck.
There was a time back in those days where everything they made in black had to be tempered with, well, what happens when you Dark Ritual it on turn 1, right? So like nowadays, in our modern times, this would be a 1 black, 1/2 that triggered at the beginning of your combat step, because it gives you all the upside that you want out of this card. It doesn't kill itself, but it activates immediately and affects the board immediately. It powers it down a little bit, but that makes it okay for a 1-drop, yada, yada, yada. So, like, this is one of those weird kind of lenses of, like, yeah, it looks crap now, but also you have to recognize that you could just run this out on turn 1, no problem, and that's what made it
and that
cool
was
and
fun.
powerful. Yeah,
exactly.
For the
and
time.
You could take out all of your opponent's land elves and stuff like that for the rest of the game.
There you go. Aaron, what's number 10?
I'm playing the role of Ruben Bressler today. My number 10 is higher on somebody else's list.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Leviathan, and I was like, all right, that's where we're going with this.
Oh, that's higher on the list. It's
right.
Ruben. We got to put that
It's
towards
at number
the top.
2.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Spoiler, jeez. All right, well, I have, my number 10 was, I would describe as sort of almost like a fan favorite of mine. It's really interesting because, there's the most frequent creature type in Magic is, of course, human. Mm-hmm. And there's only so many horrors. But there's only one human horror. And that comes in a silver border in the form of Fascist Art Director from the original Unhinged.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Fascist Art Director is 2 white and a generic mana for a 2/2. This was a common creature human horror. And for 2 white mana, Fascist Art Director gains protection from the artist of your choice until end of turn. Very nice.
Interesting. Now, there are other human horrors that exist.
Oh, are there? I'm sorry. Probably from what,
No, it's
Innistrad?
fine. I mean, they were in Shadows over Innistrad, so it's a different kind of... Or, sorry, they were in Eldritch Moon. So it was a different kind of horror that was in that house. But things like Emrakul's Ev Angel and Foul Emissary were human horrors. And then apparently Possessed Nomad and Possessed Barbarian were errated to be a human nomad horror and a human barbarian horror.
Ooh, that's neat. Well, this one I think was the first. Did Unhinged come
This
before?
is by far
Torment?
the first.
Okay.
By far the first, and
there we go.
Yeah,
I'll
and
take
still
it.
Still the most entertaining.
It's just cool. It is a really cool way to sort of, again, think of outside the Magic card. These are things they can't talk about on Magic cards because, of course, the artists keep changing. But when you're silver boarded on a kitchen table, who cares? That's fun. Let's move on here to number 9. Aaron, do you got a number 9?
I do. My number 9 is a flavorful, fun card. I think it saw a little bit of play in Standard, but not too much. It has seen new life in Commander, where you can do really broken things with it, or you can just use it for value like I do. My number 9 is the Gitrog Monster. So the Gitrog Monster is 3 colorless, a black and a green, a legendary creature frog horror from Shadows over Innistrad with 6 power, 6 toughness, and death touch. Why? At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrock monster unless you sacrifice a land. You can play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, that's Dreamborn Muse, that's Satyr Wayfinder, Perpetual Timepiece, anything silly like that, draw a card. And so this is an engine in and of itself, and, there are dumb things you can do with, I think, Scourge Familiar, where you can make a bunch of black mana and exsanguinate somebody, or, I just have this in my Muldrotha deck, where, it's just value. You're already being able to play lands from your graveyard, and so, it's just a really, really big body that will allow you to draw cards and keep playing lands, and, you can just have a lot of fun with this card, and just the art is so iconic of when you have this giant frog with just the arm hanging out. It's just so good. And I remember when the story involving this character was
sacrifice
was just the art. They just immediately got to the art and you were like, what on earth?
What is happening?
Yeah, this is a giant frog horror, which is awesome, and a $30 foil. Goodness gracious!
Yeah, sure. Not a $5 card normally.
Yeah, very
extremely
very
popular in EDH.
Yeah.
So
I'll take it. And then just a really cool way of just working with land cards, right? Like, it does things with land cards that not a lot of cards kind of do and interact that way. Right. And from anywhere is one of my favorite phrases in Magic. Like, just however it took
me a while. Like, I'd been playing my Muldrotha deck for over a year. I just discovered a couple months ago that it was from anywhere. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah,
it's true. Very nice.
It's also, I think it's like a certain build of the Gitrock monster is the number one competitive EDH deck.
Oh, I believe it. It gets stupid, and you die just so fast.
Wow. All right, Ruben, what's number 9?
My number 9. I'll take the role of Aaron Campbell, taking the role of Ruben Bressler. My number 9 is higher on somebody else's list.
Oh boy.
Goodness gracious. All right. Well, that's cool. Well, I'm about to hit my higher streak. Just you wait. Number 8 to number 6. So for my number 9, this one has a very special place in my heart in the history of Evan and Magic the Gathering. In the history of, back in the day, I started making videos. I got fairly popular because I was kind of the only person doing it for a while, which is good because I needed the reps. And finally it came to me at one point around 2008 that Wizards provided me my first ever preview card. Oh. And I was very excited about it. Of course, I had to make its own video and stuff. I'm trying to make a little soundtrack and do some serious voices or whatever. It was silly, but whatever. I loved it. And at the time, and I heard this for many years, that a Call of the Herd every turn is not what you're going to get with Creekwood Liege.
Yep.
Creekwood Liege, it comes from Eventide as a rare there. It is 3 Golgari mana and a generic mana, so black or green 3 times and 1. So 4 mana for a 2/2 rare horror. Other black creatures you control get +1/+1. Other green creatures you control get +1/+1. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a 1/1 black and green worm creature token into play.
It just makes 3/3s, right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, to Call the Herd every turn.
Call the Herd every turn. Oh, back then that was a huge deal. That was big game. We never seen anything like that kind of value producer before. Right. And this thing just got shocked or bolted.
Well, it was a 4 mana 2/2, exactly. And it was in a format with shock. So
yeah, it just died.
With a format full of things that you wanted to shock. So it stood no chance.
One of the many cards that I would get very excited about and then later go, wow, that was bad.
Sure.
That was not great.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with opening a present on Christmas morning, being excited that you've gotten it, thanking your family and hugging your new present, and then 24 hours later being like, why was I so excited about this?
I'll never play that ever again. But it was definitely fun and sweet for its time. So let's move on here to number 8. Again, I ain't got one for a while. See you guys at number 5. Ruben, what's number 8?
My number 8 is a card that is the most popular horror by a wide margin in Commander. It sees play in all manner of decks, from Masumaro to Nekusar, mono green to Grixis, to mono white to green blue, to the Locust God. I'm sure runs this card because it has to do with drawing cards. My number 8 is, of course, Psychosis Crawler. Psychosis Crawler is a 5 colorless mana star, originally from Mirrored and Besieged. It is an artifact creature horror whose power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand, and whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. I mean, it goes in every single one of those decks that combos off of drawing cards. So every Niv Mizzet, right?
Locust
every
God.
Multani, Locust God. Our preview card, Grothama, the All-Devouring. That's a great one as well. So yeah, I mean, it does everything you want.
Not to mention, I think the art is so cool. Like, it's just like this, you know, it's kind of like Sholdred, but it's like a jar with a brain in it. Like, the art is really cool. You know, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. If you're doing any sort of Is It shenanigans, whether it be Arjun, Niv Mizzet, Locust God, you know, this is exactly where you want to be. You know, it's a creature, and the creature's going to be pretty big if you're drawing cards. And then, you know, it also has this sort of ping effect on it, which you don't really see in Is It colors too often. And so, yeah, this is a really great card that you want to stick and just kind of do your thing.
Please stop reprinting it. Oh my God. Commander 2015, 2016, 2018, 2020. Like, we get it. And two other ones. Like, it's 50 cents. We get it. It's fine. You too can get a Psychosis Crawler for the low cost of 2 quarters. Aaron, what's number 8?
My number 8 is a card that just recently came out in Theros Beyond Death and immediately made an impact in these sacrifice decks. I have this in at least one commander deck, and I enjoyed this as well when I played Red-Black Sacrifice in Standard. My number 8 is Woestrider. Every time I look at this card, I immediately think of Joey Lawrence and whoa! That's like a reference like 2 of you are going to understand, but we're going to go with it.
Wow.
So Woestrider is 2 colorless and a black. It's a creature horror, 3 power, 2 toughness. When it enters the battlefield, you get a 0/1 white goat creature token. You can sacrifice another creature for free. It's a free sack outlet and scry 1. So that's pretty sweet. It also has escape, 3 colorless and 2 black. You can exile 4 other cards from your graveyard to cast this. And if it escapes, it gets +2/+1/+1 counters on it. So, you know, obviously this is a really great sack outlet if you were doing anything with Mayhem Devil or anything like that. Mayhem Devil has since rotated, so that's unfortunate. But, you know, if you're doing any sort of sacrifice shenanigans, you know, you can do a lot worse than this card right here.
I'm happy Mayhem Devil has rotated.
No, I loved that deck.
Off into the pastures.
I love that card, but boy, that card and that deck in particular when Cat Oven was a thing, but
was so
you know, even
powerful.
with just merely Woestrider and Village Rites and Priest of the Forgotten Gods and Gutter Bones and oh my God, it's so much. I love an Aristocrats deck as much as the next guy, but boy howdy was Mayhem Devil just pushed.
Shout out to all the fans of the 1990 sitcom Blossom.
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah, moving here to number 7. Aaron, what's number 7?
My number 7 is a card that helped rejuvenate an archetype in Modern. Mardu Pyromancer had been, people had been trying to do things with young Pyromancer for a while, and then out of nowhere, you know, this deck came up, and for a little while there, it was a tier 1 contender, and this deck certainly played an important part of it. My number 7 is Bedlam Reveler. So Bedlam Reveler is 6 colorless and 2 red. It's a devil horror from Eldritch Moon, 3 power and 4 toughness. It costs 1 colorless less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. It also has prowess, and then when it enters the battlefield, you discard your hand and draw 3 cards. So this was a really great way to replenish your hand, because if you are playing, you know, Mardu colors, you're probably going to burn through your hand quite quickly. You're probably also just playing Magic. You know, we say that all the time, that, you know, if a card is truly good, you don't have to go out of your way to break it. You can just play Magic. And so if you're just playing a Mardu control shell between your Thought Seizes or your Lightning Bolts or whatever, you're going to just naturally have enough instants and sorceries to make this just 2 red mana for this. It has prowess, so whatever you cast afterwards makes it bigger. And you don't have to discard what you draw. So, you know, you can just discard your chaff, draw 3 cards, and refuel. You know, this card was really, really important in that archetype. Hasn't really seen much play beyond Modern, but really powerful and just really sweet effect.
Yeah, you always have to sort of pay attention to anything that makes itself cost less. The cost reduction mechanics are always the most dangerous. And like, I think they've navigated this one correctly in terms of they got the numbers right, but it still feels amazing when you pay 2 red to get this 3/4 prowess that draws you 3 cards. Like, that's incredible. So,
absolutely. And the pretty much all of the cards universally that say discard your hand, draw 3 cards that they've printed relatively recently in red, Rix Maadi Reveler, Bedlam Reveler, Ox of Agonas, all of those cards, they feel very good, but they don't feel broken. I feel like that they've hit their stride when it comes to that mechanic.
Yeah, when it comes to costing sort of what you need to do in order to make that happen, I think they've done a really great job with that, which is great. Ruben, what's number 7?
My number 7, I'm going to take the role once again of Aaron Campbell, taking the role of Evan Irwin, taking the role of Ruben Bressler. My number 7's higher on somebody else's list.
Goodness gracious. Well, thank goodness we had at least one, number 7. That was nice. My final higher is number 6. So, Aaron, do you have a number 6?
My 6 and 5 are higher, and then that's it for me. And then I'm all yours for the rest of the night.
Oh, goodness gracious. Ruben, do you have a number 6 for us?
I do. Thank goodness. Thank goodness we re-rolled, because I previously would not have had a 9, 8, 7, 6, 4, or 3
God,
in my original version of the list. But in my new version of the list, I have added a couple, including Psychosis Crawler and this one, which I think is very important in the history of nightmares. Because there are a number of nightmares, particularly nightmare horrors, that came out during Torment, which was the black set. Later, Judgment would come and bring a bunch more green-white stuff to try to balance it out. But for a while, we had Tainted Isle, and we had, all of the black things trying to take over Dominaria, and lots of cool things like that. And the most iconic of those were these nightmare horrors, which when they came into play, they would take something, and then when they left, they'd give it back. And among those, there are some great ones, but perhaps none is more indelible, at least in my mind, so indelible, in fact, that it became time-shifted later, is Faceless Butcher. Faceless Butcher, 2 colorless black for a 2/3 nightmare horror, so 2/3 for 4 mana. When it enters the battlefield, exile target creature other than Faceless Butcher. When Faceless Butcher leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So, it was like a Flame Tongue Kavu, kind of, where if your opponent didn't have anything on the board and you did, you couldn't really play it. But also, it was great when you were just a little bit behind. It was the original, it was like the second coming of Necatrol, almost. It was the first Fiend Hunter. This was back when they were doing the Oblivion Ring phrasing, so you could also do tricks with sacrifice outlets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, also think about this sort of in context. There was no Oblivion Ring when this was printed. There was no Oblivion Ring when this was time shifted. Oblivion Ring didn't show up until a lore one, which was after Time Spiral Block.
Right.
So this card really sort of showed you different sides of the way of doing things. Like black could get rid of creatures for a while, but white could just kind of solve anything, which was a nice contrast of the color pie, essentially. And it's causing away with that Necrotol kind of feel for it. And it was okay. 3 toughness is kind of tough. I want to say if Lightning Bolt wasn't around back then, it was soon thereafter, which made this more of a liability, as it were. But Faceless Butcher is great, and I really enjoyed it. All right, let's move on here to number 5. Oh my goodness, I got one, so I'm going to talk about it.
Do it.
This card did not end Magic. All right, this card was very, I don't know about scary. I think it was just one of those, like, is this where we're at in Magic, where it just shows up and it just kills something? And if it's okay if the doggy shows up, if the beast horror of Ravenous Chupacabra happens to just show up and kill anything in Standard. This thing came through Standard, left Standard. The world did not end in the meantime.
Oh, the think pieces.
Many creatures were cast despite this thing existing. Lord knows there were whole rants on how this is like the worst thing to happen to Magic Standard in a long time, and it wasn't. For those who don't know, Ravenous Chupacabra showed up for Rivals of Ixalan, the pre-release that Ruben and I had the privilege of doing. That was fun. Ravenous Chupacabra is 2 black, 2 generic mana for a 2/2 uncommon beast horror. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy target creature an opponent controls. Simple, clean, nice.
Yep.
Just
and had one of the most indelible moments in coverage history when Patrick Sullivan went off on this card. Yeah. And while it did not ruin Standard the way that P. Sully may have thought it would have, it is, a lot of those arguments are still applied to Ravenous Chupacabra. It is still too generic. It is still too good and not interesting enough.
Right. It's not like destroy target non-flying creature or non-horror or something that could make it be a little bit challenging.
Right. Because
he was saying that essentially Baneslayer Angels of the world are worthless when something like this exists because you're not going to get any value out of it when you play it. They play this and kill it and you look like an idiot.
And he's not wrong. I mean, we did not really have any creatures that just came into play for less than, 1 mana, maybe 2 mana. We didn't have any Baneslayers. We certainly didn't have any of those.
Right.
Creatures that were good that just came into play and did nothing were pretty much unplayable when Ravenous Chupacabra was horrifying in standard.
Like when the Timmies want to just play their Gigantosaurus or whatever, their big dumb idiot, and it's fun for them to smash the 10-10, and it's like, nope, the doggy showed up and ruined your day. Get the doggy bag out because it pooped on you. Okay. Ruben, what's number 5?
I'm now focused on the doggy pooping.
Well, that's what happens. Takes a format.
My number 5 is a card that, this is the Leviathan moment of the top.
God.
Of the
Here we
top.
go.
So, this is going to be a long walk, but I want you to stick with me because I think among the most indelible, the most horrific images that come along with horror creature tokens in all of Magic comes from the small and once non-writhing township of Hanwire. Hanwire, the writhing township, it melds. So this is a long walk, so let's go with it here. Hanwire Battlements is a land that is a rare from Eldritch Moon.
Oh my God.
And it says, tap out a colorless, pay a red and tap, target creature gains haste until end of turn. We'll come back to its third ability after I tell you what Hanwire Garrison is, which is a 2 colorless and a red rare, 2/3 that flips, again, melts. Whenever Hanwire Garrison attacks, you put 2 1/1 red humans tapped onto the battlefield attacking. And then Hanwire Battlements has another ability if you control all of those things, which is pay 3 colorless, red, and tap. If you both own and control Hanwire Battlements and a creature named Hanwire Garrison, exile them, then meld them into Hanwire the Writhing Township, which was a melded creature. It was a legendary creature, 7/4 Eldrazi Ooze with trample and haste, that whenever Hanwire the Writhing Township attacks, create 2 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. The full art of Hanwire the Writhing Township, also one of the most terrifying pieces of art I've ever seen, the full version of which has a small child in the foreground just watching Hanwire writhe across the countryside.
Wow, that's a long road we went down there, buddy.
Ruben, sweetie, Pumpkin.
Yes, hi.
It's an Eldrazi Ooze, right?
It is an Eldrazi Ooze. It does say the word horror on it twice.
It is human soldier first, and then it's a land.
It's also a land.
And then it's an Eldrazi Ooze.
Yep.
And then
it puts 2 Eldrazi horror creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped. I mean, at least it says the word horror on the card.
Is that
unlike
your
doubling
bar?
Season? Unlike doubling season, which doesn't even say it anywhere.
We're back
on the
to
card.
doubling season. Here we go.
I think that if we are trying to count down the top 10 horrors, I want something horrifying kicking off my top 5. I want something that embodies the absolute abject horror of an entire town melding together and coming at you with Eldrazi horrors at its side.
I think the horror was that pick, bro. All right, moving on here to number 4. And keep moving. Aaron, what's number 4?
My number 4 is a really interesting card that I would have never looked at and thought this is going to see Legacy play. But sure enough, it saw play in the food chain decks. Remember, you know those decks, right? Yeah. Legacy aficionados. My number 4 is Eternal Scourge.
Yeah.
Eternal Scourge is 3 colorless. It is an Eldrazi horror with 3 power and 3 toughness from Eldritch Moon. You may cast Eternal Scourge from exile. When Eternal Scourge becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, exile Eternal Scourge. So this is exactly what you want to be doing along with Miss Hollow Griffin, and this card was exactly what that deck was looking for. And there's a small, kind of like Mill, there's a small dedicated audience that just wants nothing more than to play Food Chain, and this was exactly what they wanted, and they ran with it. And so, every once in a while, you'll see a Legacy event, and, there'll be that one guy at the top who's just 7-0ing with Food Chain, and it's a beautiful thing.
and it's usually Jonathan Job.
Right.
Yeah, Food Chain people are a different breed, that's for sure. You play Manipulate Fate, you play a bunch of unplayable garbage. There was also a minute there where there was a serum powder Eldrazi deck that ran this card because you could exile it with Serum Powder and it would count like an extra card in your hand.
Yeah. Thank God that didn't last.
That was wild. You sure you don't want to pick an Eldrazi ooze that makes Eldrazi?
I mean,
no, I prefer to pick cards that actually have horror in their creature type, but that's just me, you know.
That's fair. That's fair.
Crazy.
I like to pick cards that I feel are horrifying for my horrors list. So, you know, to each their own.
But horrifying is not a creature type.
Ruben, what's your number 4?
My number 4 actually says the word horror in the creature type line for a change.
New and exciting.
It is also a minion. It is a legendary creature horror minion that is bringing back a character that we had not seen for decades and has provided a resurgence for an archetype or a type of card that allows you a whole different type of gameplay in Commander because it is Karik, son of Yawgmoth.
My number 10.
Nice.
There you go. Karik, son of Yawgmoth is 4 colorless, black, but it's Phyrexian mana. Ooh. So 4 colorless, black Phyrexian, black Phyrexian, black Phyrexian, which means that it can be either paid with a black mana or 2 life. It's a 2/2 with lifelink. And it has, for each black in a cost, any cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. And whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Karik, son of Yawgmoth. So there are a number of cards that go great with this. Font of Agonies, for example, which says whenever you pay life, you put blood counters on the Font of Agonies. It just comes down for free and immediately just starts gaining value. Any costs can be paid, so your extort costs can suddenly now be paid. Yeah, Necropotence.
Like Peer into the Abyss costs 6 life and 4 generic mana now to draw half your deck, which is fine too.
Yep, that's a good one. You also get things like Vilis or Greed or other things that only cost a black to be able to pay life. Which just lets you power out humongous, gigantic things like Bolus's Citadels and, Grey Merchant of Asphodel. I mean, you can essentially pay all of your life through a card called Blood Celebrant, which is a 1/1 for 1. It's a common cleric from Legions that says pay a black and pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Well, now you can pay 3 life and just play everything in your deck. Like your entire deck just comes into play.
I remember when this card was previewed, people thought it was going to break Commander. Like Twitter had lost their minds. They were like, what? You cannot do this. Being able to drop this on, turn 2 was not impossible, between the life loss and everything else. And people were kind of forming these contingency plans. We're like, what are we going to do if this deck takes off? And people were coming up with all the ways that it was going to be a problem. And it kind of fizzled. Like, I don't think I've ever really seen it. I know Commander's Quarters did a deck tech on it, but in my experience of playing at tables, and granted it's just my experience, I have not run into this either as a commander or as a general in a commander deck. So ultimately it ended up being fine, where it's like, okay.
I recognize, like, there's, we talk a lot about sort of the magical phrases, the magical words that exist in the game, and, the Lotus and Mox and stuff like that. But Yawgmoth is a very powerful term in Magic, and things attached to Yawgmoth. This is the son of Yawgmoth, but it's
he's not really.
Right, he's completed, so he's like kind of, but not really, but in their kind of culture. And while I'm absolutely pumped for what's coming in 2021, I was a little disappointed that there doesn't seem to be any hints whatsoever of the Phyrexians returning again. And I miss the Phyrexians. Phyrexian mana, while arguably something of a mistake, can still be used in cool ways for Commander.
Fine.
It's busted. And it's fine that they busted it, but
you haven't lived until you've been in a mental misstep counterspell war.
No, I lived it. And nope. Getting space yet. No.
It's fine.
Absolutely not. This card is great, though. It's my number 8, Aaron's number 10, and then your number 4.
Yeah.
So for my number 4 here, this is a fantastic card. And this also is very much in the vein of Faceless Butcher. This card has been what was in my cube from the moment I had it to the moment I sold it. This card is absolutely terrific in the efficiency of what it does. It's fragile, but it's powerful. It hits early. It gives you lots of information, but you're able to keep something that is their best card behind a Mesmeric Fiend. Mesmeric Fiend also showed up in Torment. It is a common nightmare horror It's a black and generic mana for a 1/1 that says when it comes into play, target opponent reveals their hand and you choose a non-land card from it. You remove that card from the game, you exile it, of course. And when it leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So you can also do the stack tricks where you bounce it or whatever, or you sacrifice it.
I just learned about this. I had Alex Ullman on my stream a couple months ago, and he was showing me a black-green sacrifice list that he was playing in Pauper. And I couldn't figure out why, like, I mean, it's a fine card, but I just didn't get it. And he was like, you play this, and then you sacrifice it to, whatever you have. And the ruling is, if it leaves the battlefield before the first ability has resolved, the second ability will trigger and do nothing. Then the first ability will resolve and exile a non-land card from the opponent's hand indefinitely. Like, it blew my mind. Like,
that's part of the and even if you sometimes even if you just grab a card and stick it behind the 1/1, sometimes that's just okay.
It's fine.
Like I took your Wrath of God or whatever it was.
Like, they did Brain Maggot again, which is essentially a callback on this.
True.
This card has seen a ton of play in Standard. It was in Suicide Black. It was in Reanimator. It was just the thing you did on turn 2 in like survival decks for a long time. And now today it's popular in primarily Timna Crom competitive EDH decks. So it's still seeing play to this day.
Like putting it in that context of like there was a world where they didn't have Thoughtseize, they didn't have, they had Duress and this and this is like, well, this is a body and it can still get in there for 1 or whatever. And I can still do those silly stack tricks, which were cool too, which was nice. So let's move on here to number 3. Aaron, what's
by the way, that was my my number 8, or sorry, my number 9. My number 9.
Number 9. Okay. What's your number 3 here?
So my number 3 has been a staple of Manaless Dredge for as long as I can remember, and is a terrifying card while also still having horror as the creature type, Ruben. Is very unique to Manaless Dredge. I don't think it's ever seen play anywhere else. You will never ever like cast it. I'm not even sure if you'll Dread Return, and I guess if you're really desperate, but it really just does one thing, and it does it really well. My number 3 is Phantasmagorian. That's a mouthful. Phantasmagorian is 5 colorless and 2 black, originally printed in Planar Chaos. It's a horror, 6 power and 6 toughness. When you play Phantasmagorian, any player may discard 3 cards. If a player does, counter Phantasmagorian. That's really not what you're here for. What you're here for is the bottom paragraph that simply says discard 3 cards, return Phantasmagorian from your graveyard to your hand. So if you're playing Manaless Dredge, you want to hit a Phantasmagorian as quick as you can because you can respond to it. So you can discard 3, and then while that's on the stack, discard another 3. And so it's a really great way to sneeze out your entire hand into your graveyard and to, keep the field going for Manaless. And so this is exactly what you want to be doing. I think they were doing this in Modern. I think Saffron Olive played a Manaless version for like 2 weeks. And, people have tried. It's never really done its thing. But this is one of those cards that when you see it in Legacy, you know exactly what you're dealing with. And it just does its thing very, very well.
This is just such a weird card. It doesn't, I get it, but it's just kind of weird and dumb. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Too,
so you can throw in a Vengeful Pharaoh and be like, whoop!
This was the weird Garbo we would get back in the day of them here's an uncommon, it does something really wacky. Isn't that wacky? See you next set. That was what we got those days of. I'm
not sure I've ever seen a Phantasmagorian in play.
Me neither.
I don't think
constructed or limited.
Yeah.
Personally, I like my horrors to be in play. That's how I built my list. I liked my creatures to attack and block.
Right.
That's just me, though.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Let's move on here to Ruben. What's your number 3?
My number 3 is the final hire that is on someone else's list.
The final one. Well, look, my number 3 is awesome for a whole variety of reasons. This card was, and I've spoken about this card before, but why not? Let's go back and tell some tales about it. This was a card that when it was previewed, the world lost their collective minds. It's still a terrific mythic. It still commands $20+ to this day, which is awesome. But when the rest of the set showed up, you found out that it wasn't quite as great as originally saw because New Phyrexia had Dismember, which could kill Ferexian Obliterator.
Right.
But Ferexian Obliterator has trudged onward. Ferexian Obliterator is 4 black mana, black, for a 5/5 mythic horror.
How much does it cost?
Black.
Black. Gone! It's a home run!
With trample, and whenever a source deals damage to Ferexian Obliterator, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents.
But it's the flavor text, though. When you hear, when you think of Blessed Perfection, you just know what you're talking about,
Yes, from Shoulder Whispering One, behold blessed perfection.
And now it's a bit of a player in Historic.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, Mono Black Historic.
Mono Black Historic, trying to make Ferexian Obliterator happen. No Dismember to deal with in Historic.
We'll take it.
So it is actually doing okay.
Yeah, New Phyrexia, of course, for those who don't know, was leaked to the world accidentally via the God Book, one of the biggest leaks of all time. And Dismember was not spoiled yet when we were going on and on about how this creature is insane and how are you going to stop it and how you're going to have to block it or what gives -X. It's like, oh, the perfect removal spells right here.
I remember that's kind of right around the time I came back to the game, and this was a card that I was very excited to play with, and I was very sad to see that Delver was so popular because Vapor Snag, like there were just so many ways to deal with this that they would really just kind of laugh at you, and I was like, well, that's a bummer, you know?
Yeah, so I'm glad to see it seeing really sweet play in the older formats these days, where it's like, oh, I got to deal with that. Ooh, ouch. Eek. All right, so we move to number 2. Aaron, what's number 2?
I thought you were talking about my number 2 for a second. Then I realized it's mine and not yours, and that's fine. But my number 2 sees play all the way up to Vintage, which, really says something about a card's power level, which is funny because when you look at it, I mean, it seems kind of harmless. And then when you realize, how powerful it is, my number 2 is Ferexian Revoker. So Ferexian Revoker is 2 colorless, originally printed in Mirrodin Besieged. It's an artifact creature horror with 2 power, 1 toughness. As it enters the battlefield, choose a non-land card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated. Now, sometimes when you see wording like that, there's an exception for like mana abilities. Oh no, girl, you can name a Mox Ruby. And that Mox Ruby's not tapping. Like, that's what's happening here. And so this is an important piece in the shops decks, whether it be Golo stacks or whether it be, the 2-card Monty decks that are running around. Death and Taxes decks in various formats love this as well, in Legacy and Modern. This is a way for them to shut things down. You'd be surprised how many things have activated abilities. And so very powerful card. It can also get in there if you need to strap a sword to it or throw it in a batter skull if you need to. But, there's a reason why it sees play in at least, 3 formats. Maybe more?
Yeah. Oh, more.
This was my number 6.
This was my number 7.
Nice. This card, it just deserves to be in the top 10. Like, this was Pithy Needle on a stick, on a creature. We were dying for this type of effect around this period of time. Planeswalkers were still new and crazy, and some of the better ones had been spoiled. And it's like, just give me an ability to make it stop. Just make it stop all the equipment. Make it stop all the Planeswalkers. And it gave you that tool.
Now, here's the other thing, is that this can stop things that Pithing Needle cannot. This can stop an Elvish Archdruid. This can stop a Mox.
Yeah.
This thing can do some interesting things against
and in Vintage turn 1, not unreasonable.
Exactly.
No, not at all. So that makes it really unique and powerful and cool. And I like those kind of scalpel type, tools, particularly when they're on creatures, where you get to attack with the things stopping them from doing something stupid, which I really appreciate. Cut that out. Stop the stupid hit you. Stop the stupid. Block with your face. Stop the stupid. Okay. Ruben, what's number 2?
There are certain cards that I feel like are the most indelible images of Magic in my mind. I think of the image and I think of my childhood. It's like smelling cookies and you're suddenly taken back to being 12 years old, or you smell a campfire in the snow and suddenly you're at Boy Scout camp, or certain things take you back. And very rarely is there a card where I see not just one, but I see 2 images in my head. Because when I first started playing Magic, the very first magazine that I bought at Darts USA about Magic the Gathering was the August 1999 issue of The Duelist, which was the Urza's Destiny preview magazine, number 40 of The Duelist. And on the cover was a piece of art by Carl Critchlow that was not featured on the regular card. That art was done by John Zeleznik, but both of those pieces of art of Ferexian Negator, or Negator, were indelible and formative in my existence. Ferexian Negator is a 5/5 horror with trample for 2 colorless and a black. Whenever Ferexian Negator is dealt damage, sacrifice that many permanents. So this is sort of the flip opposite of Obliterator, right? It's backwards.
Right, this was the callback.
But again, you can Dark Ritual this out on turn 1 if your opponent is playing. So as opposed to Ferexian Obliterator, where you don't want Lightning Bolt, you don't want Shock, This one you did.
Right.
And Dismember is worse against this one, or not Doomblade, but Go for the Throat, Vendetta, things along those lines. Although that can also not target Negator. But it was part of several mono black mid-range, mono black suicide decks. It was also part of PT Junk for a part of the time there as well. So this is just one of the most iconic creatures, and certainly one of the most iconic horrors.
Well, and it also ended up updating the reserve list and pissing a whole bunch of people off, because this is part of the reserve list, and somehow it ended up in a dual deck in Walmart in 2010. Right. What happened? Well,
Wizards fine.
It's what I hate. The
it is fine,
list, but the point
there's also a gift card version of it. Too.
Right. There's a gift card version. Well, there's the Judge gift card version, and that reprinted the old artwork, and that was a foil reserve list card. This was from 2004, right? So it caused some ripples, but ultimately everyone's like, okay, we'll give you this one. You made just a few of them. It only went to judges, blah, blah, blah. Right. Well, you put a reserve list card in Walmart, like we're going to have a conversation about it. And that pretty much stamped out any reserve list cards being reprinted in any fashion whatsoever, at least from the recording of this. And hopefully that will change one day, because I love Ferexian Negator, and I'd be happy to have more copies of it. That'd be great. Let's move on here to my number 2. My number 2 is really cool. My number 2 also snuck up on me. This is a sweet card. This is a really cool card, but I thought it was just more cute than actually powerful, or cute than actually competitive. And then it took like maybe half a tournament appearance in the middle of coverage to go, holy crap, that person got ran over by Thing in the Ice. Like, they just got smashed. It wasn't even close. They flipped over and it did a bunch of craziness. Let me tell you about this card from Shadows over Innistrad. It's a blue and a generic mana for a rare creature horror for an 0/4 with Defender, but it enters the battlefield with 4 ice counters on it. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you remove an ice counter from Thing in the Ice. And if it has no ice counters at that point, you transform it into the Awoken Horror. The creature Kraken Horror, that's a 7/8. And when it transforms into Awoken Horror, return all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands.
Yeah, so this is my number 5, and you're absolutely right. This was a bit of a sleeper. People knew, so it first came out, and people knew it was good, but they didn't know what to do with it. And people were like, okay, Legacy Delver maybe. And then that was a thing for like a week, and then they threw it away. And then there were people trying to make Sultai happen in Modern, and then that was a thing for a week. But I think it wasn't until it actually rotated out of Standard, or like it was towards the end of that Standard, wasn't it? Where people finally got, hip to it, and we're like, okay, we can pair this with like the Phoenixes, or we can do, we can pair all those free spell. Manamorpho started to see a lot more play, because, you could chain them, and before you know it, you had Is It Phoenix? And so, this was another card that they absolutely had to deal with. You couldn't tunnel and just think of the Phoenixes, because you'd also just have a 7/8 coming your way. And, initially there were versions, some of the early versions had like mutagenic growth to just kind of one-shot you. And then people just kind of went for a more streamlined Is It thing. And, still sees play to this day. And I'll just never forget people going, there's something here. And then just waiting. And then finally there was no putting it back in bottle or in the ice.
Right.
Yeah, this card.
Yeah, this was on my original list. I ended up taking it off because I figured that you'd both have it at 1 or 2. This card is spectacularly good. It sort of rejuvenated an entire archetype, and it is one of the most flavorful of the cards too, and it is the most horror centric, as it returns all non-horrors to their owner's hands.
And let's not forget that it won a Pro Tour, Pro Tour Kaladesh, in the hands of Shota Yasuka, who is an incredible Magic player. It's got a bunch of weirdo cards. Energy's still in this. It was still in that format, so some energy cards in there. Glimmer of Genius, God help us all.
I used to love when people would do this to me in Modern, because they would make me put all my cards back, and I'd be like, oh, okay, and then I would just discard everything to Conflagrate and blow their face off.
Right.
All right, let's move to our number 1. Aaron, what's your number 1?
So when you're me, you get tagged in certain cards, specifically cards that have the word graveyard in them. Everybody wants to know, what I think about these cards. And I'm honored, and I think it's a really, really great thing. The problem is when people tag me in cards that are really just lesser versions of something else. And so when Zendikar Rising was coming out, there was a card called Skyclave Shade, and everybody was like, Aaron, it's like a blood gas. They gave us blood gas. And I was like, it's not blood gas, but I appreciate the thought. But there has been a long line of cards like this that, they're black. They've got maybe one toughness. You can't really block with them. They always have some sort of catch to them, but you can recur them over and over again. And so Skyclave Shade is fine. But for me, there's only room in my heart for one, and that is the original. And some people would argue there was even something before it. But my number one is going to be Icarid. So Icarid is 3 colorless and a black, was originally printed in Torment. It is a creature horror with 3 power, 1 toughness, and haste. At the beginning of your end step, you sacrifice it. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if Icarid's in your graveyard, you can exile a black creature card other than Icarid from your graveyard. And if you do, you return it to the battlefield. So this was really what started it all when it came to Dredge. Some of the earliest Dredge builds were called Frigirid, which had to do with this card. And so, this is exactly what you want to be doing. The sacrificing isn't a bad thing when you're running Bridge from Below, because this thing just dies, and it busts out into more zombies. You have the iconic art by RK Post, which is just terrifying. It's like a Naga with a tongue and multiple little arms. And so, this is just one of the best ones. You might look at Nether Shadow, but you have to get very specific where there has to be 3 and it has to be above it. And you're bringing Graveyard Order into play, and then Ashen Ghoul you got to pay for. And this was just the cleanest version, and we've never and will never see anything like this again.
Yeah, when John friggin' Rizzo came out with Frigirid,
that's right.
It was a revelation. It was nothing like it had ever been seen before.
Yeah, people were like, "What are you doing?" They're like, "What do you mean your graveyard's kind of like your hand? What that doesn't compute. That doesn't make any sense." It was insane for the time.
Yeah.
And there you go, was the precursor, as it were, from the Dredge Menace. Ruben, what's number one?
My number one is, it was always going to be my number one. It is the most competitive. It's got the most results. It's won multiple Pro Tours. It's in the cube. It's one of the most beloved cards of all time. It's seen the most play in the most decks. It's Spellskite. Spellskite is 2 colorless mana for an artifact creature horror. It is an 0/4. And it has pay a blue Phyrexian mana, which means they can either be paid by a Phyrexian mana or a blue mana, a 2 life or a blue mana, change a target of target spell or ability to Spellskite. This is the thing. This is the card that lets you do all of the other things you want to do. If you're playing, for example, a Splinter Twin deck, you can redirect all of those lightning bolts to your Spellskite. If you're playing a Painter deck, you can redirect all of those Ancient Grudges to a Spellskite. If you're playing a Lantern deck, you can redirect all of those removal spells to your Spellskite. If you're playing against a Bogles deck, you can redirect all of your opponent's auras to a Spellskite. All of those things work. All of those things are amazing. It sees play in control decks. It sees play in aggro decks, combo decks. It sees play in elves, creature toolbox decks. It doesn't just sit in artifact decks and Eldrazi decks either. It can, you want to go search for this with your birthing pod. You want to get one of these out when you're playing Merfolk, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
There are so many things.
Yeah, this was my number 6. I remember when I was learning how to play Modern ad nauseum, one of the tests that you had to pass in order to even take this to a tournament is, can you beat a Spellskite? Because it's difficult, but you can. And so, I remember there was a primer on MTG Salvation that was you basically just have to keep pitching lands until they run out of life. And then you just are able to get them that way. And so, this was a rite of passage for any ad nauseum player, or you would just slaughter pact it. But, I remember this card. I was there for the birthing pod, and I was there for Infect, and this being something you have to deal with, or even just Affinity, or even any of these other decks, and it just being so good at what it does and so unlike anything else that was out there.
Yeah, this was my number 7 in that it is just the raw efficiency of just being able to pay 2 life over and over again. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this was the only Phyrexian mana setup that's like this, where you can just pay life as much as you want to trigger whatever the ability happens to be on the card.
There may have been others.
I think there was a couple like equipment, for example, that you could pay Ferexian life to move around, but that's not sort of triggering an ability, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
But yeah, this card was hugely impactful. It kind of came and went, particularly when, Splinter Twin was the greatest thing ever. This was a gigantic monster. It got up to like $20-$25 a pop before they finally reprinted it in Modern Masters 2015, and just recently in Double Masters. So the copies are affordable these days. But it's just a great foil for anything that your opponent's doing that's going to target creatures or yourself, or honestly, like, does that target? Come my way. It's right here. Spellsky says, what's up?
So it looks like things like Hex Parasite can be done with this.
Oh, there you go.
But there are very few.
Very few. Very nice. All right. So for my number 1, which through the process of elimination has to be Ruben's number 3. This is my number 1 with a bullet. This was I was reviewing all the horrors. And I went through the whole list and I wrote down the stuff I liked, blah, 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 and I got this one. Was like, oh, bam, number 1 right there, because this card is beloved. This card has seen, it's a couple printings now, thankfully, because it was getting like stupidly expensive there for a while. Whereas Wizards only printed it in an anthology volume and in its original Commander set until finally it showed up in Double Masters as a mythic rare / a box topper, which was amazing. This card gets so much love from Commander players. It's one of the cards that I can like distinctly note. I see almost every Commander player at some point in time have spoken about Atraxa Praetor's Voice. Atraxa Praetor's Voice is the Ferexian Angel. Oof. It is a black, blue, white, and a green mana for a 4/4 mythic legendary angel horror with flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink. And at the beginning of your end step, you proliferate, which means choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there.
It's so stupid. There are so many different versions of builds of Atraxa. You can build the Planeswalker version. You can build the +1/+1 counters version. The random counters, like whatever counters you got laying around version. It's just great.
It's typically a sign that broken things are coming. Like Atraxa is one of those commanders that just gets a groan from the table whenever you reveal it, because you're either getting like infected, or they're going to do the level up thing, or Planeswalkers are going to be in play here with like the Chained Veil. But this was another one of those cards. I remember when it was previewed and we'd never seen anything like it before. We'd never seen like an angel horror. I mean, I think this was this after Bracella or before?
I think that this was before.
Like a Phyrexian Angel, though. Like that was really cool.
That was crazy.
Exactly.
And, iconic art by Victor Adame Minguez. Olivia Gobert-Hicks did a cosplay of this, which was off the chain. And so, this is just an iconic card that still has a lot of value, about $15 now, thanks to Double Masters and good stuff.
In terms of 4/4s for 4 mana that cost 4 different colors of mana, almost as good as Omnath. No, this is the 4-color legend. People were clamoring for 4-color legends for a long time. You had your 5-color legends, you had your Chromats, you had your 3-color legends, your Zera Aryans and what have you. Right. But we didn't have any 4-color legends, and this is the one that really took off.
Right. It's got those keywords that are perfect for each, the green for the vigilance, and then the black for the death touch, and the blue for the flying, and white for the lifelink. It lines up through what the colors wanted to do, which was great. That's very thematic because it's Phyrexian. It's got proliferate every turn, which is really super cool. A bunch of really cool combos with that. Card is terrific, absolutely fantastic, and is my number 1 horror. And that was our top 10 horrors. You'll see them on screen right now if you review. Take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10. And we want to hear from you about what card we did not talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ruben.
Now, on a scale from Leviathan to Doubling Season, like, where does the Writhing Township land? Is that worse than Leviathan? Is it better?
I mean, you're right in that it actually has horror on it, so I don't think it's as bad as Leviathan. So,
right, it's not as bad as the Doubling Season either, which is okay. And we go to our final slide. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler. You guys for watching or listening. I hope you support us at patreon.com/magicmics. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at twitch.tv at Magic Mics, on Twitter at Magic Mics Cast, our Magic Mics subreddit, and like the Magic Mics page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at magicmicspodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at magicmicspodcast.libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes and Spotify. Or just join us here next week, same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mics. Good night, everybody.